What's crack-a-lacking, guys and girls? Hopefully everyone's doing alright. I know I am. Marvellous day, isn't it? Especially since this is supposed to be summer, but hey ho, the story and the show must go on. But no, nevertheless, this is going to be a video in relation to the Dengfu E55, studying the intricacies of the frame in relation to the curves, the inner workings, the outer workings, you know, the subtle things to which, you know, you may not be able to obviously gauge through Google Images and such. So keep a watchful eye obviously in relation to upcoming content. Yes, I've heard all of your inquiries in relation to comparing the E55 to the E22 and subsequently the E10, so rest assured I've got all of those videos planned up, and they're obviously going to be coming. But for now, let me obviously give you a walk around the E55, my E55, and yeah, we'll go from there. Okay, so as you can see, guys and girls, this is the Dengfu E55. This is a large frame. Gee, where to begin? I'll tell you what, let's start with the head tube angle and the head tube itself, ladies and gentlemen. So as you can see, it is a bit different compared to the E22. Obviously, you may notice this little cutout section here. What may not be noticeable is that the actual head tube itself, it is somewhat over beefed up. So as opposed to the E10 and the E22, where they used a ZS56 at the bottom and an EC44 headset combination, this uses a ZS56 upper and lower. Obviously, you can still run a tapered steerer in this fork, it's not a problem, but as you can see, this frame does use internal headset cable routing. We'll talk about that in a second, but there is a spacer which allows you to obviously get the cables to protrude out of the headset, as you can see. Speaking of the headset itself, because I know someone did ask me, is it possible to run the newer style of 1 1/8 steerer forks in this frame? The answer to that is no, you cannot. It is still conventional tapered 1 1/8 to 1 1/5. So unless, I don't know, Cane Creek decides to come out with a converting headset or something along those lines, the answer is no. It is still designed for either straight steered fork, such as a dual crown fork, which this frame is rated for, surprisingly, or a typical tapered fork, hence what I'm running here. For the time being, I have slapped in this 180mm Travel 29 Lyric. This has a 51mm offset. This is something to which Dengfu did explain that they did want me to experiment with the 51mm offset, with the 44mm offset, and then of course that's where my angle headsets will obviously come into play. I've not installed one as of yet because I just wanted to make sure the difference in relation to the angle headset in conjunction with the traditional headsets, because obviously with a 170mm fork, this is pushing a 64-degree head tube angle. So obviously 180, it's obviously over forked it and slacked it out. Obviously my seat tube angle has obviously slackened as well, but conventionally would be a 77 degree, but it's, well, I'm measuring it 76.4, so well, it's not too bad. It's still steeper than the E10s and the E22s, I'll gladly say that. Moving up to the cockpit area, obviously the cockpit will obviously be changing in due course for a couple of reasons. I'm running the 500C. This is a 52-volt variant, so this allows me to pair nicely with the 52-volt battery. We'll talk about that in a second as well. Obviously you can see I'm running it far outboard, and then obviously my dropper lever is underneath. If you want information in relation to the 500C, I'll leave a card at the top right hand of the screen for you to go check that video out. Obviously paired with the DMR Defy stem. This is the exact same stem as to what I run on my E22. Basically what I wanted to do is I wanted to mirror the exact cockpit orientation as to how my E22 is compared to the E55 in relation to that upcoming video. So rest assured, when I say I leave no stone unturned, I literally mean I leave no stone unturned. Studying the internal headset cable routing, so this was actually quite interesting. So I will need to neaten it up a little bit, because it was only when I actually got everything installed and I got everything cut down, I thought to myself, hang on a minute, have I done it correctly? I understand the prospects as to how you do internal headset cable routing. I will gladly say I've never seen another bike in the flesh with internal headset cable routing. You could argue that I should have really consulted advice in relation to how it is meant to be done, but for how I'm able to gauge it, especially in conjunction with the E55, it's probably best that I go to the rear of the bike so I can emphasize this. Essentially, especially for me as a UK rider, you're effectively going with the line of least resistance in relation to the cable routing. So imagine your rear brake cable is obviously on the left hand side, and your gear cable for your derailleur is on the right hand side. As it goes through the frame, essentially you're going with the line as to what it is, and then from the headset itself it protrudes out of that direction. And so it's kind of funny because conventionally with a head tube cable routing method, especially me as a UK rider, typically, well, it's universal, your gear cable would protrude out of the left hand side of the frame, loop around and go into your shifter. And again, for a UK rider, both my rear brake cable and my dropper lever would protrude out of the right hand side, loop around and go into my rear brake and my dropper lever. Obviously this will vary for American riders and such, because obviously I'm fully aware that your rear brake cable will be on the left hand side. But essentially for a UK rider like myself, how I've built it up, again, line of least resistance. So again, orientation, brake cable furthest, dropper cable second furthest, display wire and loom kind of in the middle but more orienting towards the left, throttle, and then gear cable. But again, this is where I'm saying I might have to do a little bit more research and digging, because I'm thinking to myself, maybe it should be the dropper cable, which is the furthest outboard, and then the rear brake cable should be the second. And the reason why I say that is because technically speaking, your rear brake cable will be the least furthest in terms of length compared to the rear the dropper cable. But it's weird, I know. I'll probably have to do like a written extract to obviously explain it, or maybe show some kind of a diagram. But the point being is, for the purposes of riding, testing it, obviously there's no cable rattle or anything along those lines, so that's perfect. And as you can see, I've obviously looped the throttle around the gear cable just to again prevent any kind of like rattling cable sounds. Continuing on, so moving away from the head tube and obviously concentrating on the down tube, so you'll notice that this entire section is a lot longer and bigger than that of the E22 and the E10. The reason for that is because obviously this is not using the same battery as the E10 or the E22. This is using a completely different battery design. This is what is known as a re-engine Rhino. You can get this in well, technically you can get it in 3 variants, but for the purposes of the E55, we'll confine it just to 2. So you can get a 960 watt-hour battery, which is a 48 volt 20 amps, or you can get what I've got, which is the 52 volt 20 amps, which is essentially 1040, or in layman's terms, a kilowatt. There is a kilowatt battery housed in that down tube, ladies and gentlemen. So continuing on to the left hand side of the down tube, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, so again, this entire area is housing that kilowatt battery, ladies and gentlemen. You'll notice that the power switch and the key latch are located on the left hand side on the E55, as opposed to what the E22 and the E10 would be, which would be on the drive side or the right hand side. Again, further emphasizing, this uses a different battery design, ladies and gentlemen. And as for the key latch design, this is a lot better than what you've seen on the E10 and the E22. In fact, you know what, we'll just touch upon that just for a second. So if you're familiar with my content, as well as a couple of posts from a couple of Dengfu owners, the original Dengfu E10s, they had a bit of an issue in relation to the intermittent power loss issue, where the battery would obviously rattle and it would cut power to the motor, as well as water ingress issues. Now, Dengfu, throughout the runtime of the E10s, they obviously redesigned the lower mount just so that you could obviously ensure that the battery remains in place. And as for water ingress issues, well, the M620 don't really suffer with water ingress issues. We'll talk about that as well, because this bike has been flawless. But like I said, continuing on with what I was saying, essentially this bike has just been amazing in terms of jumping it, in terms of just lifting it up, slamming it to the ground, that battery is not falling out. The power does not turn off unless you want it to. And in addition, just emphasizing this as well, so there has been a couple of people who I've seen who have indicated, like, if you lose the key, ways in which you can remove the battery, like a credit card, and you just slide it in. I will gladly say, because the way in which Dengfu overbuilt this in terms of keeping that battery in place, you don't have that provision. If you lose the key, you ain't getting this battery out easily unless you, as I'll say it, damage the frame. That is the only way. This will only work once the pin has been disengaged off the battery, which it then brings it down, and then you'll be able to swing it out and then take it down. So again, there's no method as to how you can remove the battery unless you have the key. Do not lose the key. I've gone to numerous key cutters, ladies and gentlemen. The keys can be cut. Again, it's Riention, it's not ABUS, what Bosch uses or anything along those lines, where you need this specific serial number. You need to obviously get a new one. The keys can be cut. There's no excuses. The frames come with 2 keys. Put 1 spare. If you lose it, get that spare, get it cut, you're fine. But like I said, the battery is secure. There's no power loss issues. When I say I've been hammering this thing, ladies and gentlemen, that's an understatement. I have literally, you have no idea, ladies and gentlemen. And I've not even been the only person. There's been others, heavier riders than me, who have been hammering this thing. But anyway, moving on from the down tube area, let's talk about the top tube area and the rear shock assembly. Now, this has actually been a controversial issue, ladies and gentlemen, on the Dengfu Facebook group in relation to commenting as to why Dengfu implemented the sloping top tube design. Personally, it doesn't really bother me. You know, I've got bikes which have sloping top tubes. I've got bikes which have straight top tubes. Obviously the E10s and the E22s, they have the straight top tubes. This bike has the sloping, but the top tube being curved, as well as the shock as to how it's mounted here. Again, it's for structural integrity, considering that this frame is coil rated as well, along with being dual crown fork rated, which I think this is the first frame Dengfu have released which are both coil rated and dual crown fork rated, ladies and gentlemen. Again, 180mm travel I'm running this at, so I'm fully aware that you can get a boxer with 180. So that will be something we'll be messing around with this frame. So this is a 230 by 65, ladies and gentlemen. So indeed, if you've actually studied the Dengfu geometry chart regarding the E55, they declare 230 by 60 gives 150mm of travel. This 230 by 65 allows this bike to be overstroked. On screen right now, this is what the bike looks like, fully compressed the shock into the air can. And I'll be honest, I don't have a 230 by 60 eye-to-eye rear shock knocking around. All my spare rear shocks have been 230 by 65. And I was originally going to put the X2 in this, but unfortunately the X2 did need a service. So yeah, that was a TF tune job and quite expensive. But one thing I will gladly say is that Dengfu have stated that this is coil rated. Now, I'm not too sure which coil shocks Dengfu have tested, but I will gladly say not all coil shocks are built equally, and not all air shocks are built equally as well, especially in terms of accessing the dials, like your compression and your rebound. This section, which is designed in order to obviously give structural integrity to the frame, may hinder you accessing certain aspects regarding the rear shock. So on this Super Deluxe, the rebound dial is situated underneath. Now, it's accessible, but with my big hands, I'll gladly say it is a 2-finger job where I'm using 1 finger and another finger in order to kind of twist it. Obviously, how I've got the bike set up, I've kind of got it in a set and forget kind of way, but just letting you know, if you've got a rear shock where, you know, your dials are going to be in an awkward position in order to access this, I'm not saying it's going to be a problem, but make sure that you've dummy runned it first before you obviously start committing and saying, I'm going to put this rear shock into this frame. Moving beyond to the linkage area. Now, being completely honest, You've seen this before, ladies and gentlemen. This is what's used on the E10 and the E22 and the E23 and the E56 as well. But essentially, yoke is the same, bushings are the same. I've brought this to Offset's attention. I'm not too sure whether or not they'll have a dedicated page in relation to the E55 for bushings, but I will it's the same as the E22 and the E10. Offset, if you're watching, you could do the cheeky thing and just say E22/E55 bushings and have done. Everything is the same. Hardware, the yoke, the torque values, it's the same, so you do not need to worry. Moving beyond that, obviously you can see the bottle cage. I'll be honest, this is the worst bottle cage I've installed. It should be side loading, it's spare. I'll be honest, I can't really fit a bottle in this, but if you actually look as to how the bottle cage is kind of oriented, you ain't really gonna get a decent bottle in here. But at the same time, as soon as I get like a proper decent side loading bottle cage, you can, I think you will, trust me. I'll take a picture and I'll obviously put it on the emtb forums and the Dengfu Facebook group emphasizing it. But the point being is, don't worry, don't let this bottle cage fool you. You can put a decent bottle in there and run like a 600ml bottle quite easily. Moving at the bottom, obviously I've propped the bike up and an old seat tube which I've had knocking around, and as you can see, race face cranks 165. The BB height on this M620, even though that the positioning on the M620 for this bike is technically different, but I'm pleased that Dengfu have retained the low BB height for this bike. So if you're familiar with the E22, my content of the E22, you'll note that when I ran that bike with a 170mm travel fork with 27.5 by 2.8 inch tires, the BB height was 330, and that was impressive, all things considered. Obviously running it as a full 29er, because BB height obviously increased, so if I'm not mistaken, I think BB height on that bike was 342 in the end, with the 170mm fork and the Assegai in a 2.5 and a DHR2 double down 2.4 out back, laced with WTB SDI 30s. This is 345 roughly. I'm running this with 2.4 inch tires up front, which is a Trail Boss, and an Eliminator in the back. Don't judge me, that Trail Boss is coming out, don't worry. Technically the E22's BB height is lower, but it's not monstrously high as to some M620 e-bikes I have seen. In addition, you'll notice that this is the first bike, if I can get good in here, which actually uses a bash guard for the M620. Now I did ask Dengfu about this, because if you can see, there's actually vent holes for the bash guard as well. Now I know this has again caused a bit of controversy, and especially for myself, because even I was thinking to myself, but that makes no sense. The M620, one, it doesn't need cooling in that area because the controller is situated in the back, not at the front. It's not like the M5 and the M600 where the controller is technically situated here. It's in a different location. Simple. It does aid in water ingress issues supposedly, but as I said before, the M620 doesn't suffer with water ingress issues at, well, I don't want to say at all, but throughout my experiences, water ingress has not been what kills this thing. Moving away from the motor obviously area, because the Q factor and whatnot is the same. Dropper insertion, there you go. So technically speaking, this is a 180mm dropper. The reason for that is because my 210 did need a service. Moving on to the rear of the bike, ladies and gentlemen. Now this is where things get interesting. So there have been a couple of people who have asked the simple question, is this a retooled E22? The front triangle is different, and that goes for the rear triangle as well. This is not a repurposed E10 or E22 rear end. You may think it is, but it is not. It is different. The seat stays at the lower are different. The actual magnet sensor, that is still in the same location if you were to measure it perpendicular to the rear dropout, so that's fine. But the actual length of this is longer, and technically so is the chainstay length as well. As for the bridge is the same as the E22, you might think. However, it's probably a bit difficult for you to see, but there is a bit of a groove cutout section here. It's kind of like a square section which is cut out right here, which is different to the E10s and the E22s. The E10, it's got a groove. The E22 is straight, and the E55, there is a square cutout. It's not a cutout, but it's kind of like an ingress groove. The actual rear axle is the same. I felt no need to obviously take further pictures, because fun fact, if you've got an E08, E09, E10, E22, the axle spacing is the same. The rear mech hanger design is the same, so they've not changed that. And again, the hardware and the torque values per the hardware and the linkage, that is also the same as well. Speaking of, someone did ask me, why didn't Dengfu implement the universal derailleur hanger for the E55? I'll be honest, Dengfu haven't answered that question either. I've asked them that as well. I asked them that from the E22 days. 500C display, as you can see here, so just turning it on. This is the 52 volt variant. I know the 500C, it may not be everyone's cup of tea, but it does the job. It's a display. You've got the Egg Rider V2, which would probably be a better display. In fact, I actually run the Egg Rider V2 on the E22 as well. It's far more sleeker. I will be covering the E55 a lot more extensively, and again, there will be content comparing this to the E22 as well as the E10, so keep a watchful eye, ladies and gentlemen. If I've missed anything in relation to what you guys want to know in relation to the E55, please leave them in the comment section. I'll be more than happy to explain. I'm not going to make a thread on emtb forums in relation to the E55 frame, because, you know, Ben over at Dengfu, he's kind of done it for us. TFU Freak, which I'll leave a link in the description on the emtb forums, he's also made a very good thread about the E55 as well. So again, link in the description. Oh, and the Acros headset, I forgot to mention. Someone did ask me, can you run the Acros headset with this bike? As I said, initial inquiries in relation to whether or not you can run the Acros headset suggest that you can. Obviously, that's why the reason where the headset cable routing will probably be amended in due course, ladies and gentlemen. But nevertheless, like I said, if you've got any questions, please do leave them in the comment section. As always, thank you for watching, and obviously stick around for future content in relation to the E55. I've been having a whale of a time on this thing, ladies and gentlemen, and truth be told, it is impressive. It is impressive. I won't lie. Oh, before I let you go, because I do realize that, you know, it's easy for me to say, oh, it's impressive, and, you know, people usually watch videos like this and think, okay, so that's an excuse for me to spend even more money. I want to say this. I really want to say this. I want to push this and emphasize this. This has not rendered the E22 obsolete. I want people who own the E22, people who have the E22, people who have spent their time building them, who I've built for. This does not render this bike obsolete. You'll see this in the upcoming video when I do the comparison to the E22, but rest assured, this is a different weapon compared to the E22. The E22 is a brilliant bike. This is also a brilliant bike, but there are subtle differences between the two, where the E22 and the E55, they have different applications and mindsets in use. Hence the reason why there are certain components which you can use on the E55, which the E22 can't really support, but there are connotations to what the E22 can do, which the E55, I don't want to say lacks, but it is an aspect to which you'd need to keep a watchful eye in future content, to which you'll be able to see me convey that on camera, ladies and gentlemen. But I'm not going to go into too much detail at this point, because again, you will need to obviously see it with your eyes. But I just want people to know, because at the end of the day, I don't want people to watch this and think, so what I've got, which I've bought maybe a year ago, is effectively being rendered obsolete. Because I'll be honest with you, when I see content creators who do that, who say, here's the newest, latest and greatest, and what you may have, which is a year old or 2 years old, is now crap, I hate when I see that. I hate when I see that. And this is the newest of Dengfu's electric mountain bikes. It is brilliant, but I don't want people to think that the E22 has been rendered obsolete. Love me or hate me for saying that, I don't care. But if you have the two to hand, you realize that they are different. But anyway, I'll leave it here. Thanks for watching. Stick around for future content. And until the next time, take it easy, stay safe, peace with the journey, hashtag FABT. And I will catch you in the next one, ladies and gentlemen. Peace out.